Welcome back to the Combo Cabal. Brent Cook here. I am joined by Alex McKinley, and today we're going to talk about Modern Horizons Cards with Storm, specifically. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I'm excited about all these new cards. Excited to play them. Excited to test them. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, the set drops tomorrow, which is the day that this video will go live on Magic Online. You'll be able to get the cards in chests, and then on Thursday you'll be able to buy the cards from bots. I know there's a bunch of cards I'm looking to get. I'm sure you're in the same boat. We're going to talk about a few of them today.
Yeah, gonna be refreshing a couple of spots. Like especially Card Hoarder. They're pretty good.
They're all right. But no free advertising here, Alex. Come on. None of that. But instead, Alex, if you're looking to support this Storm content, what can you do?
You can like this video. You can share it on social media. You can especially subscribe to us. All of those help algorithm things go wild, and we really appreciate it, especially if you want to continue seeing more content like this.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better myself. But two other things you can do, though, Alex, is the first thing, you can go to theepicstorm.com/donation decks and submit your combo deck to be featured here on this very YouTube channel. What an awesome way to support, further combo content. It's one of my favorite ways that people support us, at least in my opinion. And the other thing...
And if you're
Sorry, go ahead.
if you're super interested in seeing one of these new cards and you have a brew ready, ship it right in.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Alex. Another thing you can do is you can go to theepicstorm.com/shop, pick up a pint glass, a mini token pack, or one of my favorite things, the Storm 20 baseball tee. I know it's hot here in New York already, and I've already worn mine a few times. All right, so Alex, without any further ado, the first card we're going to talk about, whoops, double flash, AV Progenitor Ooze. It's up on screen. Alex, why don't you read it for us?
AV Progenitor Ooze is a legendary ooze creature that costs 2 generic mana and 3 green mana. It's a 2/2 and it has Storm. If it's a token, it isn't legendary, and it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other ooze you control. So this is the first permanent spell with Storm, right?
It is. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So rules-wise, making copies of permanent spells is something that's relatively new. Notably, this doesn't trigger create interactions. For example, Doubling Season, it doesn't interact positively with. Each of these tokens will have a converted mana cost, or will have a mana cost of that same 2 GGG. So those are just weird things that permanents with Storm are going to do to the rules.
It's worth noting, and Alex mentioned the converted mana cost of the tokens because things like engineered explosives will not kill the ooze tokens. So keep that in mind. Engineered explosives is not an answer. Alex, what formats do you see AV Progenitor Ooze seeing play in?
This is a weird one. I could see it in Modern. I could see it in Legacy. I could see it in Vintage. It's not Pauper legal. Unfortunately, it would be nuts there. But it creates 20 power at such a low Storm at just 5. And for 5 mana, that seems pretty worth it to investigate, especially when you can't Flusterstorm this.
Yeah, that's one of the big things. This is a Storm spell that cannot be Flusterstormed, which is super cool. It is still hit by Stifle, unfortunately. Womp womp. But a lot of people are talking about this card. Some members of the Storm community think that this is the best Storm card previewed so far. There's still one more day of spoilers, so we don't have everything yet. But some people think it's the best Storm card previewed. I don't know if I'm in the same boat, but let's break it down. So let's talk about Legacy first, because Alex, that is the format that we're most familiar with. What Storm deck do you think is more likely to play AV? Ad Nauseam Tendrils, the Epic Storm, or maybe even, a different deck?
It's really hard to tell. I think Ant might play this more often, but I could very easily see TES picking this up just as like the same. Lion's Eye Diamond is the key card that comes to this, making that GGG is so much easier when you're casting it through Lion's Eye Diamond. The other thing is that when you're finding this with Wishclaw Talisman, it's much less likely that your opponent has an answer to this compared to something like Empty the Warrens. Most of the sweepers in the format are -1/-1 effects, which don't answer this. So even if your opponent, even if you hand your opponent the Demonic Tutor, they might not be able to find an answer at all.
Might not. That's the key thing. Like Empty the Warrens, you are risking your opponent having that sweeper. Things like Maelstrom Pulse aren't played anymore. That said, you could be helping them, find and cast their Terminus on your upkeep. That's certainly a possibility. Toxic Deluge. But the answers are few and far between in the year 2021.
Yeah. It does get hit by Karakas, but that is kind of a good thing because the biggest token is always going to be the creature card itself. And if the creature card gets bounced back to your hand, well, that's just more oozes.
Theoretically, yes. Maybe a little bit hard to cast, but it's possible. So, Alex, this card has something against it, and in my opinion, that's its mana cost. 5 converted mana, or mana value, I guess I should say, if we're being technical. The mana value being 5 is a little bit restrictive. This is primarily because both Legacy Storm decks play the card ad nauseum. That's the biggest downside in my eyes. How do you feel about that?
So, having the same converted mana cost as ad nauseum is like a double-edged sword, because there's a lot of times where putting ad nauseum on the stack will be better than putting Ave on the stack, and then also having them both in your main deck means that you're going to have a higher average converted mana cost for ad nauseum, and it's just going to be less consistent, making your plan A's worse, or in Ant's case, plan BC.
So another thing is sometimes you can get away with playing higher converted mana cost cards into your deck, like an Echo of Aeons, for example, in the Epic Storm, or a Dark Petition in Ad Nauseam Tendrils, because they're going to allow you to win on the same turn. With AV, you're not going to be winning on the same turn. You will be passing the turn, which is really dangerous after you've cast Ad Nauseam. Also, if you've played Ad Nauseam, there's a good chance that this card's pretty difficult to cast. That said, for Ad Nauseam Tendrils, it would allow you to theoretically beat Veil of Summer.
Mm-hmm. It being a creature is upside and downside, because being a creature, you can't Burning Wish for this. You'd have to play something like Living Wish, and this is your only Living Wish target isn't very good. If people came up with a set of other things that were flexible in the same way a lot of our Burning Wish targets are, then maybe you could start to have a conversation. But as it stands, putting this into your sideboard and putting a Living Wish into your main deck is not going to be consistent enough.
I can think of a legendary metal creature I'd like to play, Alex, with my Living Wish. We're talking about Hope of Ghirapur. Don't play Living Wish. It's not good.
You could also find Karakas to answer Thalia.
That's true. All right. So we've covered it in Legacy. Well, do you have any final thoughts on it in Legacy?
That's all I have for Legacy. I think that there's some like insane Chain of Vapor things you can do in Magical Christmas Land. But overall, I'm kind of interested in this in a slot similar to Empty the Warrens. That's the closest comparison that you have.
Okay. Well, in Modern, there's Gift Storm and Twiddle Storm that would likely play this card. Gift Storm really doesn't have a use for anything like AV, especially at green. You're going to have to filter multiple Manamorphose in order to cast this, and it's just not likely. In Twiddle Storm, you do have a land that taps for triple green. This could be an option out of the board that replaces something like Aria Flame. I don't know if that's worth it, because sometimes when you're boarding in Aria Flame, you're also boarding in Ad Nauseam, and once again, Ad Nauseam and AV don't play that well together. And then it's even worse in Modern, where you don't have 0 mana cost cards in your deck. Instead, you're relying on Twiddles to untap your Lotus Field in order to cast it. And once again, you're passing the turn. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on Modern.
Yeah, I think in a deck like Gift Storm, it's super awkward because you can't like gifts for this and Past in Flames and flash it back. The interaction just doesn't work like that. You need like an Underworld Breach or some other effect to bring it back from your graveyard, and that doesn't work very well. You do have Manamorphose and Gift Storm to try to cast it from hand, but that it seems inconsistent. And I think in Modern, your life total is just under so much more pressure, and a lot of times I think your opponents are just going to be able to race this.
Yeah, Izzet Blitz being the best deck in the format is certainly scary when you're trying to play a 5-drop.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then the last format that you mentioned, Alex, was Vintage. So this is a card that I also thought about for Vintage. One, it's not restricted, so unlike Monastery Mentor, you could play multiple of it if you wanted to. It does have Storm, so when you're, casting Paradoxical Outcome a bunch of times, you could end up making 37 oozes and then casting Time Lock, which is kind of funny. That said, you would pretty much need to have Black Lotus in order to cast this. Theoretically, you could tap your Mox Emerald in a few Mox Opals, but for the most part, I think you're just relying on Black Lotus to cast this, and that makes it not so great. It's also a 5-drop for Bolas's Citadel, and you'd really have to ask yourself, what am I gaining by playing this over other options? Right now, there's Sedgemoor Witch, which you could be playing, or there's always, what is it called?
Monastery Mentor.
Managorger Hydra, if you want that green option. Mm-hmm. So the reason that people play these off-blue creatures is so that you can dodge Pyroblast. Well, with Sedgemoor Witch now on top of Monastery Mentor, I think that Eevee lost its home that it could have possibly had, because now you have 3 other playable options before Eevee. I just don't see it being very likely.
It is kind of interesting in a PO show because the Storm requirement to create lethal damage is so low. Like you could probably create lethal tokens off of 1 PO for even 2 or 3, if you can make that triple green. That's the restricted part, is it's triple green.
Yeah.
You only have 1 Lotus.
You could theoretically play a list with like more Trops instead of another color. I just don't see it being very likely, though. It seems a little bit like a pipe dream to me.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So any other final thoughts on this card before we go to our next green Storm card?
It's probably fine and limited.
I imagine. All right. The next one up is also playable and limited. Chatterstorm. It's already making its way into Storm fans' hearts. It's even gained a cool nickname via Twitter, Nutshot, play off of Grape Shot. Alex, do you think that this card will get banned in Pauper?
100%. Storm cards don't stay legal in Pauper.
So I think there's a reasonable chance it gets banned. I also think that there's a small probability that it sticks around. So you have to do some work in order to make this really good. A lot of people are talking about it with first day of class. So that way you need 2 cards for lethal. Keep in mind, if you pass the turn, Blazing Volley is a card that sees play. A lot of people run cheap sweepers for fairies and also for the Mogwarts deck. So on top of Blazing Volley, there's the Pirate Sweeper for 2 in a red. I can't think of its name.
Fiery Cannonade.
Yeah, Fiery Cannonade. So that sees a lot of play, which would, even if you have the first day of class, stop Chatterstorm from killing the opponent, which is sort of interesting. That said, if you happen to have multiple copies of first day of class, each one resolves individually the triggers and the squirrels, so they would never be able to sweep your entire board if you played 2 copies of first day of class and then Chatterstorm. I just think that it's interesting to think about. That said, my expectations for this staying legal are pretty low. People have reported turn 2 goldfishes. I haven't seen that myself, but it's certainly possible. Like with the card pool that Pauper has. I wish it'd stick around. I just don't know if it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I have thought of is that in Pauper, so your deck, realistically, you need, at least at the bare minimum, you need Jund colored mana. So you need Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, and then people are using Manamorphose to cast Chatterstorm in first day of class, and then Lotus Petal. But I'm also seeing lists playing blue for Ideas Inbound and other cantrips. So that means you're a 4-color deck trying to win on turn 2 with not so great mana. I'm just throwing that out there. It can be a little difficult sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I very rudely interrupted you. Alex, what were you going to say?
I think I was going to try to move on to Modern, because I think this card almost feels like a foregone conclusion. It's going to be nuts and Pauper, and then it's probably going to get banned. If anything about the past Storm cards have said anything. So
okay. So what do you think about it in Modern
then? This is going to apply to Legacy too, but it's really your first realistic Storm win condition that goes straight through Gaddock Teeg. You can make a reasonable amount of squirrels to kind of buy yourself time to either find removal for the Gaddock Teeg and go off for real, or just kill your opponent. You get to do the same thing you get to do with Remand if you're playing it in a gift shell of cast this, remand it to make double squirrels. Is that better than Empty the Warrens? It's unclear.
So I would like to say your Gaddock Teeg statement is technically true for a majority of Storm decks. With Twiddle Storm, you can actually beat Gaddock Teeg. You don't ever need to cast the main deck Past in Flames. And that's the only card that's affected by Gaddock Teeg, which is kind of insane if you think about it. Because Underworld Breach is 2 mana, and then Grape Shot is also 2 mana.
Yep. Again, it's another Storm win condition that requires you to pass the turn.
And that is also true. So passing the turn, not ideal. Empty the Warrens is falling out of favor in Modern just because, you know, decks are going over it. So is it Blitz? They play Crash Throughs. Death Shadow plays Temur Battle Rage. It's not reliable. There's also Plague Engineer in the format. So it's certainly a liability in Modern.
Sprite Dragon is a heck of a Magic card.
That is also very true. So my expectations for Chatterstorm in Modern are pretty low. I think if you were able to cast it faster, it might be slightly better. But in Modern, especially in Twiddle Storm, this is a turn 3 play, and by then you can usually win with a Grape Shot anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And with Gift Storm, why wouldn't you just Grape Shot them for lethal or cast Empty? Like, I don't know what you're gaining by playing this in Gift Storm.
Especially because in Gift Storm, you're having to like truly stretch to that third color, which not everybody was doing. A lot of people were just playing straight blue-red, and rebuilding your mana base isn't ever easy.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Alex, your special format, Legacy. What do you think about it there?
So this card, I think, is not going to see play in Ant. I think Ant doesn't really have space for this effect. Legacy decks are a lot more deterministic than their Modern counterparts. You're not drawing as many cards. You're relying a lot more on direct tutor effects. So this card is much more at home in the Epic Storm, where we have this Wish sideboard full of silver bullets. So when your opponent does play that Gaddock Teeg or Sanctum Prelate on 4, you can just play this. Sideboard space is incredibly tight in a lot of our current configurations, and many things might change. We'll see about that. So I think that's the challenge, is like, is this card worth the slot in the sideboard? And I'm excited to cast it a few times and figure it out.
Yeah, I'll be completely honest with you, Alex. I plan on testing it over that second Thoughtseize slot that we talked about, but my expectations are pretty low. I think the value in something like Chatterstorm is when you're facing a Dazed deck like Blue-Red Delver, and you get into a counter war over things like Veil of Summer or something along those lines, and you build up Storm, and maybe you get up to 10 or 12 Storm, and you can use this as a cost-efficient Empty the Warrens in the Delver matchup. But for the most part, I don't know how good it's going to be. You can beat things like Gaddock Teeg. Theoretically, it does open up some lines where, let's say you Echo of Aeons on turn 1. Let's say you Burning Wish, you Echo, you create a bunch of mana, but you end up just short of lethal. You can then Chatterstorm for 14 and pass. So it will open up lines where you don't need as much mana, similar to like those Grape Shot lines where you're short on mana but your opponent's low on life total.
Yeah. How do you feel about this card versus Death and Taxes?
I've thought about that a lot, and like honestly, I've been afraid to talk about it, and I'm upset that you did it right now, Alex, because I don't know if you're actually supposed to do it. So a lot of people, the way that they use Empty the Warrens is that they just always go for it. Like, it's just the rule, they always go for it. But the problem is that you actually need 12 tokens on the draw to beat Batterskull. You need 10 on the play. Well, 8 squirrels on the play won't beat a Batterskull. There's going to be some games where it doesn't beat Mother of Runes into a turn or into a blocker on turn 2. So if you're going to take that line, you can't expend all of your resources. So I think those sort of lines are okay if like you go Chrome Mox, Mox Opal, Lion's Eye Diamond, play your land. Maybe you have another Opal in hand or something, or a Lotus Petal, and then you Burning Wish, you Chatterstorm for 7 or 8, and then you still have that Wishclaw Talisman or another Burning Wish or something in your hand. I could probably see it being okay there.
I think I'm in the same boat. Like this card does not line up against against Batterskull, and I think turn wanting this for 7 is even unrealistic a lot of the time. Like if you think a lot of your turn one empties, you're emptying at Storm 4, Storm 5, maybe Storm 6. That's if you're lucky.
Keep in mind, you'll be able to cast more cantrips and stuff leading into this card.
That's true. If Gitaxian Probe was legal, I think we'd be having a little bit of a different conversation where you do have that free Storm Enabler. But I think it might be a Delver card. It's one of those, like, you just fell short of being able to kill your opponent with a Grape Shot. It's an interesting silver bullet, and we'll see if it's worth the slot.
So, Alex, unlike previous Wish targets that we've played in the deck, this card I think is unique because when we're often boarding with this deck, you have 4 Veil of Summer that can come out against non-blue decks. And then you have 2 copies of Defense Grid. From there, we have 2 Chain of Vapor, 2 Abrupt Decay, a Thoughtseize, and then 1 Unknown. This is a Wish target that you actually wouldn't mind siding in. Like, if you just open-handed this, you know, you played out your Baubles, your Lion's Eye Diamonds, your Opals, whatever, and just cast this for 6 or 7 from hand, I think you take that.
Yeah, it's definitely a card that you could play multiples of these in your main deck. It's possible there's some like mono green Storm deck out there that plays like 4 copies of this in their main deck and like goes off with Sylvan Library. I think we had a donation deck that did something similar with Empty the Warrens and Tendrils, and that deck would probably be very interested in this effect.
And when Alex said mono green Storm, he did not mean elves. I know I published a video with that recently. That is not what he meant.
No. Don't put this in your elves decks, please. Actually, please do. Make them worse.
Yeah. I think that wraps up my thoughts on Chatterstorm and Legacy if you don't have anything else.
Yeah, I think that if we're going to talk about Vintage, it's not especially great there either.
I would agree.
Yeah, Empty doesn't see play there. This has all the same problems that Ave does, where the prowess-esque creatures are just so much insanely better in the context of that format.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Hunting Pack. Alex, this card is not a new card. This is a reprint. Originally from Scourge, the same set as Tendrils of Agony. This card not Legacy playable as is, we know that much. Not Vintage playable, we know that. Not legal in Pauper. So this is only brand new to Modern, correct?
Yes, that's true. Only to Modern.
Okay. So, Alex, do you see this card in any deck, not even just Giftstorm or Total Storm, in any deck playing Hunting Pack?
Honestly, not really.
I think I'm in the same boat as you. So that said, I know that there's some boomers out there who remember the old Mirari's Wake days, and they did just add Mirari's Wake into Modern in this same set. And Hunting Pack, I think, is a callback to that standard deck back during Odyssey Block. I think if you want to just play your old Odyssey Block deck, you're allowed to do that in Modern now. That said, I don't think it's very good. Sure, you can have for your 5/5 beast or whatever, but I don't think that this is going to see a lot of play. You would never want to twiddle up to 7 mana to just pass the turn, making beasts. While that can play around Graveyard Hate, there's better options. Aria Flame exists. And then a card we'll talk about later, I think, is also better than this for beating Graveyard Hate.
Yeah. Making 2 beasts in Modern Horizons Limited, though, is kind of neat if you can do that.
Yeah, for sure. It is a late game beater.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you save up a bunch of Strike It Rich, which is a new card for Modern Horizons 2. We don't have a slide for it, but 1 single red mana, create a treasure, sorcery, and then you can flash it back for 2 in a red. That is Strike It Rich. So if you can sit on a bunch of those, play Hunting Pack, get 3 or 4 beasts would be pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Alex, this card has sweet art. Look at it. Spreading Insurrection.
It does.
I've played Insurrection as a child. As a small child and Onslaught Limited, I played Insurrection. This is a similar card for considerably less mana. That said, you're not getting everything.
We should read it. So it's 4 in a red, gain control of target creature you don't control until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn, and we have Storm. So right off the bat, Wizards has some creative wording here that you can't just give your whole team pseudo vigilance by untapping them. This to me is a limited only card. It's going to be a blowout when you can cast it for 1 or 2 and just break open a board stall. Maybe Brian has a different opinion, but
I do. I don't think it's limited only card. So you're going to roll your eyes at me, Alex. I apologize in advance. So when playing Modern, some people like to play... Oh, now I'm going to blank on the card name. I even own a Japanese foil one. The other 4 in a red card from Scourge. Or no, from Scourge, Time Spiral. Ignite Memories. They like to play Ignite Memories to beat Tron. And this card is a similar role, in my opinion. So Ignite Memories, you board it in against these expensive decks that play a lot of Graveyard Hate. And then you go, okay, you revealed your Ulamog, take 10, or whatever Ulamog... I don't know if it's 10 or 12, I can't remember. I think it's 10. And then you take both. 10 again. So that's the role. You beat Graveyard Hate, and then it has a niche role of beating decks where the converted mana cost is high. Spreading Insurrection is similar, where it's a card that can beat Graveyard Hate, but against decks that, you know, play large creatures, like Death Shadow, for example, or I guess Death Shadow is the best example. So you can take Shadow itself, you could take... What's the new Shadow for 2 mana? Scourge of the
Skyclaves.
You could take that as well.
Notably for Death Shadow, it will switch its power and toughness to be 13 minus your life total.
Correct.
So if you can be getting beaten down, then it's fine. I'd be excited to steal a Sprite Dragon with this, or even a Swift Spear, and then continue to storm off a little bit more to try to create lethal on 1 turn. So maybe it's interesting there.
I don't know how good it actually is, if I'm being honest. That said, it is an option. Because, I mean, I've certainly sleeved up Ignite Memories in the past. Like, it's something I did in a video a month ago. So it could... I'm just saying, this is one of those cards, it's going to cost you a nickel, and you can put it in your Storm box and forget about it. And if the right metagame ever comes, it's there. That's all I'm saying. I don't know if that metagame will ever come, but for such a low opportunity cost, why not get a copy?
Yeah. For Vintage and Legacy... I don't think anything applies.
I would agree. And Alex, the next card, this is the reason I wanted to make this video with you. You know what it is?
It's Galvanic Relay, the last Storm card spoiled from Modern Horizons 2. 2 in a red for a common sorcery. Exile the top card of your library. During your next turn, you may play that card and storm. I'm going to be honest. When I first saw this card, I was very low on it. I read during your next turn, and I wrote off the card mentally. This card is much more interesting than that. So
when I first saw the card, I was like, this card has potential. And I think Alex's words were like, did you read it? And we got into a little bit of a debate, and Alex slowly came around. So one of the biggest factors, in my opinion, with this card is the way that the Epic Storm is currently constructed. And same thing with Ruby Storm. They play a lot of cards that say draw. And draw is an issue due to effects like Narset, Hullbreacher, Leovold. They all prevent you from drawing multiple cards. While Galvanic Relay doesn't draw cards. So you do get to set up a little bit. In this next turn thing, I get it. It's not ideal. You'd rather be able to cast these cards these turn. Completely understand. Alex, can you think of a ban card that also doesn't give you your cards until next turn?
Necropotence.
That would be true. So I don't think Galvanic Relay is quite as strong as Necropotence. You can certainly make it use of it. Like, Necro, if it was legal, would be bananas. Like, I'm not ever saying that it should be. But the next turn thing, people like to exaggerate that. I do think that you can get value out of Galvanic Relay against blue decks in particular. And overwhelm them. So maybe you open hand Galvanic Relay, you play some 0 mana artifacts, you play Relay for 5 or 6, and then next turn you have a brand new hand and you're quickly churning through your deck. Like, that seems pretty sweet to me.
Yeah, this is not the type of card where you're going to cast it for 10, 11, 12, and just like draw your whole deck with it. It's going to be a small value play. It's going to help build your advantage turn over turn, which is something that the Epic Storm has converted into doing a lot more in recent years. You play out your Wishclaw Talismans, you play out your artifacts, you invest your mana. I do want to break down the during your next turn a little bit. You can't play instants during your opponent's turn with this. You can play lands with this, a land on your next turn. You can use your Lion's Eye Diamond mana to play these cards, which is probably relevant for all of these decks playing 4 Lion's Eye Diamonds. This card works very, very well with Wishclaw Talisman and all of our permanent mana sources, where even if you don't go off the turn you play, the turn after you play this, you still get to convert those cards that you flip off of this into something.
So, Alex, there is a card that we're currently playing that I don't think plays very well with Galvanic Relay. Do you know what that is?
Is it Echo?
I would say Mishra's Bauble. So, Mishra's Bauble is a nice card because you get to generate that storm for free. That said, anytime you ever reveal a Mishra's Bauble to Galvanic Relay, it's a bad time. Just because that draw is 2 turns away. So, I think if we're going to test Relay, maybe we forego Mishra's Bauble. It's just worth pointing out there. But instead, once again, I know that we've already talked about this card, Alex. Strike It Rich, I think, plays very favorably with Galvanic Relay.
Yeah. It's a card that you can just invest kind of at will for just to generate Storm on the same turn, which is good with this card. Essentially, any sort of ritual effect that you cast to play this card is a rummage effect, because you discard the card this turn, then you get it the next turn, and then you get the card back the next turn. So just turning through your deck, having access to more resources, I think that you're able to power through most blue decks just by drawing 4 to 5 extra cards.
So why don't we explain that a little bit? With Storm, your opponent would likely have to counter a copy of Galvanic Relay or try to counter one of the cards revealed to Relay on the following turn. If you get them on a Relay for 5 or 6 on your first turn, they're not going to be able to do a whole lot about it, even as the Force of Will deck. So this is a way for Storm decks to fight back against the 6-7 Force of effects. I'm talking Force of Negation and Force of Will that the blue decks now have. This is a way for combo to recuperate that card advantage and overwhelm them, even with all these pitch counters.
Yep. I think that we're going to see this card played very similarly to Empty the Warrens during the Deathrite Shaman era, where against some of these blue decks, we board in a bunch of copies, and then you just kind of like throw them at your opponent as quickly as possible. Empty the Warrens itself has fallen off, notably because it doesn't play well with Wishclaw Talisman. It doesn't win as much as we want it to anymore without Gitaxian Probe. And this might kind of do the same thing, and especially because all the Delver decks have gotten aggressive and are just trending more and more aggressive. Cardinal Flowers, you don't have enough time to leverage the mana off of that card as much as you used to.
Yeah, so the current plan, at least for Alex and I, is to try this over Cyborg copies of Carpet. I don't know if that's going to stick around. It's just our initial thought. But I'm certainly looking forward to testing this card. I think it's going to be really, really sweet. And then there's other formats other than Legacy. So this was the card I alluded to earlier on in the video. I do think that this is a sideboard option that you could play over Aria Flame in Modern. Because, you know, you get to dodge the graveyard. The whole passing the turn thing, I think, is a lot worse in Modern. So I do think it's a little bit better in Legacy. And in Pauper, it could stick around as card advantage. I'm not sure if this card is too good for Pauper. I think if a Storm card that's legal in Pauper sticks around, this is one that could be it. I think Chatterstorm's likely to go. I think they might leave Relay.
Yeah, the other issue with this in the context of Twiddlestorm is that if you once you reveal your splice cards, you can't. If you reveal like a Psychic Publisher, you can't then splice onto cards you cast from the Relay with that puppetry, because you have to splice from your hand.
That is correct.
If you have a puppetry in hand and you like reveal an Ideas Unbound, you can splice onto that. So it does work sometimes, but it doesn't work as well as you want it to.
Mm-hmm. So, Alex, I don't know if I have anything else left to say. Do you?
I guess in Vintage, this card kind of is like PO copies 5 through 8 if you want it.
That's
in some ways.
True, especially against other blue decks. That said, 4 Flusterstorm is the standard in Vintage right now due to Sedgemoor Witch. So that's kind of an issue. Yep. One thing I'd like to note for Legacy, Stifle has fallen off the map due to Expressive Iteration. So this is going to get some use against that blue-red Delver deck. I am a little bit worried about dying after casting this. That is certainly a possibility. Because those blue-red Delver decks are very fast. This is not a card that you want to cast the turn you need to win. This is a card you want to cast and set up turn. So keep in mind that if you draw this, don't sit on it too long. You do need to get rid of it, or else you could end up dying.
Or just pitch it to Chrome Mox.
That is also an option. I know that Alex and I have talked about 3 of it in the board, and then boarding in a few copies. It is going to raise your converted mana cost in the deck, so you have to figure that out. Because, you know, the Echo of Aeons is in there, Tendrils of Agony, and if you're boarding Galvanic Relay, all of a sudden your converted mana cost starts looking really high. So we don't have a solid plan for that yet. If you have any suggestions, let us know.
It's, again, like with Empty the Warrens, it's probably going to involve cutting tutors.
Yeah.
Because that provides the least damage to your average mana value. Just makes Ad Naus less consistent. This card's awful to flip off of Ad Nauseam. You deal 3 damage to yourself, and it's probably not good to cast on that turn.
Yeah. All right. So, Alex, I think that's it. Thank you for joining me here today. I do appreciate it. I hope all of you enjoyed this Storm review. And, yeah, cheers. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, Brian Cook here. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, but also follow the social media channels down below. If you want to support this content directly, I would recommend going to theepicstorm.com/shop. And if you need a little bit of assistance with the Epic Storm to get to that next level, I would recommend going to theepicstorm.com/tutoring. Don't worry, there's more great content coming right up.